We're going to talk a little bit about the AI risks, the artificial intelligence, and how we can incorporate it within our workforce. As Matthew said earlier, I'm the partner here at AAFCPAs, responsible for data analytics, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, and IT security. Along with me is Ryan Wolff.
Hi, I'm Ryan Wolff. I'm our solution specialist here at AAFCPAs. I started in our audit department here, and I now work in a hybrid role between our audit department and our business and IT consulting department. And I really focus on bringing automation, innovation, and analytics to our clients, as well as focusing on artificial intelligence use, both within the firm and with our clients.
So, coming into the artificial intelligence and looking into the different aspects of it. One of the biggest aspects of it is the data management. How do you use artificial intelligence into the workforce, and what that would really mean? Starting up, we have the large language models, as we call them. This is where people like everybody can go in and start asking the right questions. We call them prompts, as to get the right answers. And to get to the right answer, you might have to use multiple iterations of the prompts to get into the answer that you're looking for. But we need to be very careful how what we ask with these prompts. The information that we provide becomes property of the tool that we're using. So, for example, if I was to use an example here, ChatGPT, which is probably the most known one, but from everybody, it's how you would ask it, and you don't want to say something to the fact that you provide information about yourself, your organization, and all your clients. Because the moment you do that, it's going to become property of that entity, and it can be used as an information for a prompt that somebody else would ask in the future. And that's why it's important that if there's confidential information, we need to be able to keep the prompts at a very generic level so that we don't give that critical information out to the world. Every organization should be able to gather the information that is needed and give some guidelines to the workforce as to how you can go about using these tools. For example, if you were to have ChatGPT, and I'll give a more specific example for how we use it here. ChatGPT, you go in and you say, that you have information, financial information about a client of yours. What you would do is you ask generic information as to, how can I format the table? Can I use certain formulas? But you're not going to go about, here's the full information with all, the financials. Can you please format the table for me, right? That's a no-no. So a very simple example, but it goes down to the point as to why we need to be very careful, right? Because the moment you do that, the financial information was provided in that spreadsheet, and you gave it out to ChatGPT just for very naive reason to format it. Well, you just publicize this information, right? So with that, it has to be very careful. So the next part of it is data security, and why is this important? Is because these systems are sitting somewhere up on a server, which is up on the cloud. And if you were to use that system, it could easily be accessible if you don't make the appropriate security measures. These systems could be accessible by others. And when I say others, so Bruce, is not going to be good people, right? So it's going to be people that are going to try and exploit these systems, and as such, get access to the information that they host. So that's another slide, what I was saying before, but the concept is the same, is to be able to somehow restrict or reduce the risk of having the systems being accessible for people that you don't want to, and also having the data being out to people that you also don't want to. The other part of it is that has to do with data security, but along as to what the data is that's being used, is that these systems depend on data that they have access to, so they can go read your prompt, understand what you're trying to ask, and then as a consequence, go and find the sources they have and respond back to you. Well, you can imagine that if I have bad data and I go in and look at it, that data is bad. So my response is going to be bad, right? So depending on how the resources that these systems have are good enough, you can imagine that your response is going to be as good as the data they rely on, right? So it's very important that we keep that in mind. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about policies and procedures.
Thanks, Vassilis. So establishing an AI policy is probably one of the most important things that organizations can be focusing on right now. Going back to what Philip said during our keynote presentation, anyone that has access to the internet has access to these AI tools, whether it be a ChatGPT or any of the other ones that are out there. So for companies to really get ahead of that and kind of get a policy in place before employees start using it without really any sort of training or education on it is really important for that data security and data management that Vassilis was just talking about. There are a couple basic things that should be included in an AI policy. So you want to have rules around confidential data. What does your organization treat as confidential and what does it not treat as confidential, so that you have policies in place saying it's okay to put this information into a LLM, but it's not okay to put this information into it. And that's really going to help prevent any escape of that confidential information outside of the organization. You can also base that policy off of a framework such as the NIST framework, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology from the U.S. Department of Commerce. You really just want to make sure that that policy is really encompassing the main points around LLMs. Again, the confidential data, what you can use that LLM for if you're doing certain tasks. Maybe your organization does not want you using an LLM for that. And those are things that should be included in that policy up front. And you also want to make sure that you're including something along the lines of anything that's coming out of an LLM needs to be verified by whoever's actually using it. You can't just take information out of ChatGPT and assume it's correct. You can use ChatGPT or, again, any of these other LLMs to give you a good starting point, but you really want to make sure that the information you're getting out of it is true and accurate and relevant for whatever you're trying to use that for. And we'll get into that more a little bit later about how ChatGPT and some of these other LLMs can start to hallucinate and really provide information that is not correct at all. And if you don't do your research on that information, you can really make yourself look bad of presenting this information that you thought is all correct and it's really not true at all. You also want to be aware of, if you're using any third-party services, are they using AI, and how are they controlling any data that you're using with that third-party service in an AI server? So just something to ask as you're going through and kind of evaluating new third-party services. Are they using AI? Are they using any of your data, and how is that data being protected? And to kind of encompass all of this around the policies and procedures, it's good to have either a risk committee specific to AI or to have a subset of a risk committee that is focused on AI in the organization. Because, again, as Philip said earlier in the keynote speech, this is not going away and it's evolving very, very quickly. So as leaders of the organizations, you really want to be able to get ahead of AI and kind of get some, at least a general policies and procedures in place, and make sure that you have a committee that anything that comes up involving AI in the future, you have somewhere that you can turn to, instead of you have employees coming to you with AI questions and you really don't have any policies or procedures or committees in place to handle those things. So with that, we are going to move on to our first polling question here. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how concerned are you about the risks of AI within your organization? Now, we can rank these kind of 1 to 5. 1 is being, I have very little concerns about the risks. I think my organization is designed to handle it well. We already have stuff in place like a procedure, policies, or a committee that's reviewing AI usage. Or you can be very concerned. You might not have had time to set up any of this, to look into any of this, and you could really be concerned that your employees are using AI technology without your use or your knowledge, and you don't really know what that technology is being used for. You don't know if work that is being put on your desk is coming directly from that employer, if they used AI to generate it. And to many people, that can be a scary thought of, how can I really control AI being used? What information is going in? What information is going out? So it can bring a lot of fear into organizations, but it's also something that really needs to be looked at as, if I'm scared of it right now, how can I change that so that I'm not scared of it in the future, so that you can embrace this technology and really use it for your benefit? So we'll give another 10, 15 seconds on the poll or so. Again, these are for CPEs, so if you want that CPE credit, make sure you get to answer it in the next 10 or so seconds before we move on to the next slide. All right, give everyone one more second here. So now, going off the policies and procedures, how do you train and educate your employees? Obviously, again, these tools are available to anyone that has web access and internet access. If you're on LinkedIn or if you're on any sort of social media, you might start to see things. There's ChatGPT out there, there's Copilot out there, and your employees might get curious. They might log on to these websites. Next thing you know, they have an account and they're starting to put information in it. So as much as it is important to get those policies and procedures in place, it's also important to get the training in place. So for those trainings, what do you want to stress? Again, very similar to what's in your policies and procedures. You want to stress that certain information cannot be put into these models. If you have certain questions, as Vassilis was alluding to earlier, maybe make it a generic question instead of using the specific information related to your client or related to a specific situation, so that you can get your answer, but at the same time, you're not really exposing any of that important information. You also want to make sure that you're staying up to date on the training and education. AI is evolving very quickly, and there's new technologies that are constantly coming out. So even if you do offer, maybe you've offered a ChatGPT training, or you plan to offer a ChatGPT training in the future, it is important to keep up on that as these technologies continue to evolve and change, so that you can stay up to date on everything that's going on. And now we will move over to some other things to keep in mind related to AI. Vassilis?
So with that in mind, we need to keep some things into perspective. As I mentioned earlier about the data and how these large language models and artificial intelligence systems work, is that the way they have been responded to is based on algorithms and is based on the data. And as with every case that involves data and decision-making point in algorithms, that means that somebody has a certain idea as to how these things are done. And as such, they're biased, right? So imagine just a quick example. If I was to say, just simple example, let's say Boston is the best city in the world, right? And I populated all the resources with such data, and somebody goes and ask one of the citizens, like, which city is the best in the world? It's going to come back and say, obviously, Boston, right? So it's the way that we need to think about the systems and how they react. Obviously, they're a little bit of their infancy right now, but they're coming adults pretty quickly. But with keeping that in mind, it also exposes another danger with them, which is the danger of hallucination. The first thing when I heard the word hallucination, I was like, are we talking about a person now, or are we talking about a system? And well, indeed, we're talking about systems. And what it's all about is that there are going to be times where you're going to prompt them about something that you want to get an answer for, and they're going to give you a completely wrong answer. And that's the term hallucination, right? That's how it's used in these terms. And Unfortunately, it does exist. It happens, and we need to be careful for it. Because if we don't verify the data and we take it for granted that the answer is correct, guess what? We're just accepting a wrong answer. Some other things that we need to be careful of is the ethical concerns, which is as to where is the applicability of artificial intelligence, and where do we say, you know what, usage of it is enough. And there is a lot of talk among the industry as to what that is. For example, in Europe, all the big countries, they have come up with some standards as to say this is what's allowed and what's not allowed. And the reason for it is exactly that, right? Where do we say I can use ChatGPT, I can use Copilot, any of these systems to help me out versus it's not just a help, it's it doing all the work. And they're acceptable uses, and some of them they are not. How do we go about them as to using them? It's how we're going to manage them, because we need to make sure that the way we take in the work that happens with these systems, it's embraced, right? We have to embrace them. There's no way that we're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to look into AI. You have to, otherwise you're just going to left behind. But the way you're going to go about it is very critical as to the success of using it and everything going well, or using it and something going really bad. So how do you manage is very important. It has to be done in a way that access, usage, it's well defined, it's managed appropriately by the right people within the organization. And last but not least, I also already mentioned it, but you need to make sure that you understand the concept that everything that you get back from these systems solely depends on the data they depend on, right? So just a quick note here, make sure that if you use it appropriately, and make sure that you understand that there are dependencies as to how the systems are going to respond to you. So with that, we are turning it over and see if there's any questions.